Hey guys, have you ever felt really frustrated because you seem to be learning something and then when you need it, you don't really remember it? You feel like you're just stuck and can't improve, can't remember anything? Well, it turns out that your memory is not really the problem. The problem is what you do with that memory. So, right now, I'm going to tell you how your brain works. And what I'm going to tell you right now is going to help you understand what you need to do in order to really improve. First of all, I'm going to ask you a question. And most of the information that I'm providing in this video to you is from this book, Uncommon Sense Teaching, written by three neuroscientists. And it basically talks about the way your brain works. Really good stuff. First of all, in this book, they're inviting us to guess what we think is the most efficient way to learn something. And they offer four options. Reread, like if you learn a new piece of information, is it the best thing to do to reread it? The second option, highlight things or underline. The third option, recall. That just means to force yourself to remember something, bring it back to memory. Or create a concept map, like the one in this picture. Well, which one do you think it is? I've asked around, I've asked some of my students, and they told me it's the concept map. The correct answer, though, is recall. But this is a topic for a different video. Long story short, forcing yourself to remember things is the most effective way, as we know of today, to force yourself to remember some information. Now, we got to figure out the two types of memory that exist because this information is really important for your understanding of what is happening when you learn something new. So we have two types of memory, working memory and long-term memory. We'll start by talking about long-term memory. It's basically like a storage facility where you store all the information that you learn throughout life. Now, let's talk about how that actually works. So your your long-term memory is made up of a bunch of neurons. To be more specific, about 86 billion. That's 9 zeros. And they're like the building blocks of your brain. When you learn something new, the information travels between these neurons. So they kind of look like this, like a cactus. And when you learn something new, a signal travels from one neuron to the next one and they connect, sort of like this. When you're introduced to a new topic, so for example, a teacher presents a new rule or you read a text and you try to work with chunks, you create these neural connections. And the more you work with this information, and all the different ways to practice are not created equal. Some are better, some are worse, but that's not important right now. So the more you work with this new information, the more you strengthen these connections. So these neural links become much, much stronger. And that's how you create your long-term memory. So the authors of this book refer to this as learn it, link it. And this is pretty much the reason why English in a month is just complete bullshit. It's not possible physically for your brain to absorb this much information in this much time. You cannot possibly learn all that, create those neural connections, and strengthen them enough to actually start using it. Because this point is not necessarily, well, let me say it like this. When you learn something in English, it does not mean you're able to use it, which is why you may have noticed that you learned a new topic, but you still can't use it when you speak, even though you know the rule. It requires a lot of exposure. So there's that. Now, some people seem to think that, they seem to blame their long-term memory. So let's talk about that. It's not actually accurate in the sense that our brains are really capable of storing a lot of information. So try to guess how much information does an average brain have? Like how much storage capacity it has. We have four options: 250,000 bytes, 7 million bytes, a quadrillion bytes, and an octillion bytes. Which one do you think it is? The right answer is this. It's really hard to imagine what this number even means. So the authors of this book came up with a really great way to kind of explain it to us. They say you can think of it as the number of dollars owned by a million billionaires. It's a lot, right? Long story short, your brain has more than enough space, and that's not something you have to worry about. It's a lot of extra space for that new information. But the actual challenge is to move that information into this storage. And that's when we need to figure out what is working memory and what is the connection between working memory and long-term memory. So your working memory is, you can think of it as a spot in your brain that deals with the pieces of information you're using at the moment. The authors of this book suggest that you think about it as an octopus that is tossing some balls. And in this case, a ball is like an idea that bounces around in your brain. So on average, a person can deal with about 4 such balls. And people are different. For someone, some people can deal with a bit more, some people can deal with a bit less. If I'm not mistaken, by around the age of 14, a person develops this adult ability, adult working memory, so to speak. When you add too much information into your working memory, the octopus just can't deal with it, can't handle it. So as a result, some of this information just might slip. And that's why sometimes you are staring at a rule in your English lesson and you're like, yeah, I got it. And then you get home and you're like, oh, I don't remember anything. I don't get it. So that's what's happening. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with your brain or anything else. That's completely normal. Your that new piece of information was in your working memory and it's no longer there, which is normal if you haven't invested enough time and practice into actually moving it into your long-term memory. So the real question is not whether or not you have enough, like whether or not your memory is good enough. It's it's how you can move that information from your working memory into your long-term memory. So what I do with my students, for example, well, first, retrieval practice, like we talked in the beginning, is proven by research to be one of the best ways. And so you need novel exposure to the topic. So you need to practice in a bunch of different ways. And for example, with my students, what I do is, let's say we're working with a text, we highlight certain chunks, certain expressions that I want us to study. Then if it's like, let's say, a script of an audio, I can cover certain words and have my students remember those specific chunks. Then we can, they come up with examples of those chunks and we figure out the extra information about them, the connotation, who can use it, an adult or a child, is it formal or informal? Can you use it to talk about, like for example, to nominate someone for something. Can you nominate Joshua to be the cleaner, the mopper, or do you nominate someone, an ambassador? So we talk about all these things, what we call connotation of a phrase. And then we can use it in speaking and playing a board game, in different exercises, in writing our own dialogue with those phrases. Long story short, you learn something, it starts by being in your working memory, and then through practice and novel exposure, you move it into your long-term memory. And then time goes by, you get more exposure to that bit of information, and that's when you can actually say, I learned it and I can use it. So the reason I'm telling you all this is just to show you that there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with your memory. You just need to understand how your memory works. And hopefully this will help you realize how you can actually learn things and why English in a month is just complete bullshit. So I hope this was useful. If it was, please do let me know in the comments below. And if you'd like me to make a video on effective ways to use this retrieval practice, do let me know in the comments and I'll consider it. Bye bye.